So it's my great pleasure to lead this panel on the roadmap to harmonize sustainability information, which roadmap is already a challenge, and sustainability information is also a challenge. So we have two huge challenges here. But of course, I'm accompanied by a very, very good panel on this. And starting in order, alphabetical order, there is no other agenda in this. Let me go to Bryan Coughlan, who is the Financial Services Officer at BEUC, which is the European Consumer Organization. And he works on consumer protection issues in retail investment markets. So this, of course, includes sustainability disclosures, regulation, the retail investment strategy, and the EU sustainable finance strategies. So before that, he was at the Federation of German Consumer Associations. So again, this is really interesting because you have had a different perspective in different markets, which you, Aleksandra, have had too. Then I go to Patrik Karlsson on my left, who's a senior policy officer at ESMA. I don't think to those of you he actually does need an introduction, neither did Bryan, but I'm giving you anyway. He is, of course, I think, Mr. Sustainability for me at ESMA. Sorry, Patrik. And he's working on anything that is investment fund policy development, looking at disclosures, fund liquidity, leverage, alternative fund investment management. He was previously at ICMA, Prudential, and the British Banker Association in the EU. So he has a long experience in financial services. To the furthest left is Lenny Kessler, who's a portfolio manager at the WHYO, 15 years experience in asset management, mainly in Asia for European institutions and private clients of high net worth. But he is really keen and passionate, and I've seen that, about sustainable finance. And he's actually chairing the ESG committee of CFA Society France, and very engaged he is too. And last but not least, Aleksandra Mączyńska, Executive Director of Better Finance. She's from Warsaw, where she was the Deputy Director of International Relations at the Communication Department of the Polish Consumer and Competition Watchdog, which is where I referred. And I love the fact that you come from, Poland, you come from Germany. We have a very wide variety of different EU member states present. She also worked at the division for the World Bank International Monetary Fund on debt issues, international finance structures, and she was with the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And of course, she has been in many EU working parties, and also working very long time now with CFA Institute on different issues of sustainability, retail investor interests, etc. So just to go with you before we get into the nitty-gritty of sustainability, it's important that this panel looks at what actually is trust. What is trust in financial services? Can we speak about trust in financial services? At lunchtime, we were standing around, several of us, discussing how from the year 2000 probably has very much changed in the way the retail investor is approached, or his rights. Probably not. We keep increasing complexity throughout the years. We are in a world which is increasingly digital and automated, which should facilitate, but it can also confuse and nebulize the issue. So there is a big challenge in trust. At CFA Institute, we have a yearly trust study, and this is quite interesting. It discloses some of the issues facing retail and institutional investors throughout the world. So it's on our website if you want to have a look. But when we look in the EU, and this is our concern today, I'm going to start with Patrik, representing ESMA, on you have actually done some consumer tests. And I would really love, before we go into the SFDR template, etc., let's have a quick look at what that consumer test showed up. Thank you, Patrik.
Thank you, Josina. Thank you, everyone, joining. Yeah, back to the difficult issue. We are often accused of sitting either how far away from the consumer actual concern or desires or wishes with regard to sustainable financial products. So we have tried in playing our role in the framework, often the vision of standards, templates, and so on, to try to find out a little bit more about consumers and what they think about how they value certain things and not value other things. Of course, we have no good answers to this, and our assessment was nearly as wide as we wanted. For usually the common cause of time, you have to develop everything incredibly quick time, difficult, pause everything, go down, find out. What we did find out though, that the legislative framework is very difficult to get across information to them, and that leads to them a trust deficit. I don't think it's particularly significant or unovercomable. But it's certainly there, and it doesn't help that we have two concepts of sustainable investments and their taxonomy. Very difficult to explain that these are actually two different kinds of sustainability. Investors always think that there is one, the EU has developed it. There might even be aware of some controversy around the taxonomy, but in most cases they don't even know that the taxonomy itself is meant. They respond better to words like the sustainable. So I think we have definitely a kind of problem with the patchwork of rules and the way in which we try to require information to be presented to investors. We presented one way of doing this in the SFDR delegated regulation. We very much look forward to understanding how that works in practice from the 1st of January, and that becomes visible. And we are thinking about ways in which this could be improved and want to learn more about the use of those templates and the reaction that investors have when presented. So I don't have a very good story yet, but we hope in the future to learn more about it.
As you say, work that it has to continue. I'm going to take you, Bryan, because I would like you to highlight some of the
I would like you to highlight some of the regional differences in terms of trust and also in terms of expectations. You know, what do your consumers around Europe expect?
So there's no lamp on this microphone. I hope it works. Okay. So a country by country analysis is something we can't provide actually, and that is one of the key problems we have, is that we have insufficient data overall on what consumers experience on retail investment markets and sustainable investment markets in particular. But we have very nationalized investment markets in Europe. There is no functional capital markets union on retail investment. So we do see differences. We do see differences in the Netherlands, for example, where there's a ban on inducements and results are better. And we see different investment cultures in Germany, for example, where people like to get fixed interest rates and so forth. That exists. But overall, the trust issue, I think, is a prevalent one. If you look at the consumer market scoreboards, you will usually find that investment markets are very low on the rung of trust, sometimes the lowest. And that has many reasons. Part of it is that an investment decision, as we are organizing it now in the European Union, requires an inordinate amount of trust from the consumer side. Consider the experience of somebody who doesn't work in financial services. You're confronted as this standard consumer with a problem that you probably need to invest for, like your children's education or your own retirement, which we've pushed into the markets and so forth. These are things you understand to be of vital importance for your own and your family's well-being down the road. You have no idea how to do this. You do not understand this complex system. And you still need to engage somehow, but you will not be able to judge the quality of what you've done for years until it's too late to do anything about it. So you're relying on somebody else to help you with this decision. This is an extreme amount of trust. It's something we otherwise only see in medicine with doctors or sometimes in law. So the demand on trust for consumers to engage with investment markets is very high. And then the other side would need to be trustworthiness, which is problematic because of conflicts of interest in the distribution and so forth. And then we're adding sustainability on top, which is a highly personalized and value-driven thing, where you have to put another layer of trust on top that people will actually do what they promised you and that their understanding matches yours. And so I think we have something approaching a trust crisis in this market. And the only way to fix this is establish more reliable systems, more trustworthy systems. You cannot build trust on more marketing. It has to be earned long-term, year on year. And so, yeah, what we're looking at, creating more transparency systems, fair enough, good start. But that won't do ever, because if you rely on amateurs to create for themselves an information space, it doesn't matter how much information you provide, it will never be adequate to the situation. So we also need to change the fundamental distribution systems in financial products, and we can maybe go into that a bit later.
Thank you very much, Bryan. As you were speaking, I was reminded, of course, that parallel to the information and the trust, there needs to be a good redress mechanism. And this is, of course, something that has also been talked about for many, many years and is still lacking at an EU level. I've always, in my wish list for ESMA, said, you know, I would love for ESMA to have an ombudsman service in all the languages of the EU, etc. But of course, we know, you know, this is very difficult challenges. Aleksandra, I'm going to you now, and you are going to share with us some of the findings from DSW's study in Germany on this issue. So that'd be great.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Aleksandra Mączyńska, and I'm representing Better Finance. Most of you know that Better Finance is a federation. So we have member organizations in different member states. They represent shareholders, investors, financial consumers, insurance policy holders. And we try to do also at least some of our research projects in cooperation with our members. When it comes to this particular study, it was done by DSW, so our German member organization representing shareholders. And they had a look at what is the, right now, the assessment of semi-professional investors and how do they feel about the advice that they are getting already after the sustainability preferences rules have come into force as at the beginning of August this year. And it looks bad. So in general, they are not trusting the advisors. They are very cautious when it comes to any green products. I mean, on the one hand, they would really like to invest in them, but they are very much afraid that some of the claims about the greenness are going to be simply monetized by the distributors. So they are going to pay more for that, which is, of course, quite frustrating. We were wondering if this high level of mistrust of German investors is probably also due to some recent scandals that happened in Germany. And of course, they are very much publicized. I mean, starting with Wirecard some time ago already, and some other concerning also green products in Germany. In Germany, however, already the German VZBV, so Verbraucherzentrale, they had already some proceedings also concerning green marketing claims, and they are also winning some of those court proceedings. So investors become not only more aware about what is happening on the market, but also taking already some first steps to do something about it. And they have even the willingness and the time and some financial resources to go to courts. But of course, it should look differently. When it comes still to trust and the awareness, the Warsaw Economic School did some surveys for the European supervisory authorities about the trust and understanding of investors in sustainability disclosures. And it was also pretty bad. So the result was pretty frustrating again, because the study was done and the survey was done among young people. So are they students or graduates with also some economic knowledge and courses done in it. And then it turned out that even the icons that were referring to some of the sustainability preferences, so the ones that should be even more understandable or easier to understand, were confusing them instead of helping them. So there's still a bit to do in terms of trust. Oops.
Thank you. Thank you, Aleksandra. And I think I was reminded of when you were speaking that this Warsaw School of Economics study was done with the, let's say, younger generation. In the trust study that CFA did, the younger generation quite clearly said, oh, we wouldn't hesitate to buy financial products from Google, Alibaba, etc. This is an added challenge. You know, we think we're looking at the financial markets, financial advisors that have some sort of fiduciary conduct, but, you know, you go beyond it, which, you know, you can buy anything anywhere. We have seen, of course, you know, the Karlsson sisters touting crypto, so anything is possible. Lenny, I'm going to turn to you in the French market. What is your experience on this issue?
Thank you. I'd like to cut the question in two halves. One, I think, is a little bit the timing. When we look at the report from the CFA, we see Europe trust is pretty much below the rest of the world. I'm not sure that is so negative. I think part of it, at least, is just because we're starting to tackle the problems. We talk about greenwashing, etc. When we see the numbers, you know, in Asia, for example, and I'm now into consultancy, but until not so long ago, I was investing in Asia. I'm not sure they deserve that much more trust, even though maybe I'm an insider in some ways. But so this is one problem that I'm fairly confident will come over with the ongoing work on solving the greenwashing, or at least reducing it. On a more fundamental side, I think we have a big problem of complexity. The subject is complex. You know, even if we mentioned taxonomy several times, it's already 6 objectives. If we add the social, governance, all the legal requirements that come on the underlying issues, it's extremely complex, and we cannot really ask a retail investor, as you just mentioned earlier, to come and talk to his banker and choose something in 5 minutes. They absolutely cannot understand it. So I only see 2 ways. On one side, we need to integrate the complexity. It's our job to make complex things simple. And on the other side, we need to educate. I'm not sure where every country in Europe stands, but I know in France, financial literacy were, I think, last on the OECD scale. So as long as people don't understand the basics, it's really, really hard.
Thank you, Lenny. And by referring also to financial education, it is important, but we need to find that balance, because you cannot put the onus completely on the investor. As you say, some things are too complex, and, you know, a patient will not understand all the nitty-gritty of the medicines he's taking. It's logical. Although, you know, with Google, we'll try and double guess our doctors. But I think it is about this balance between the governance of the product, you know, looking at what it is, looking at some of the issues there, looking at that fiduciary responsibility and the investor education. And that balance is incredibly hard for regulators and supervisors. Turning now to a little bit placing the EU in the international context and sort of looking at some of the challenges and opportunities in the upcoming European sustainability reporting standards, looking at the clarity of those standards and the benefit for end users and non-professional investors. Patrik, what do you see as some of the challenges of the ESRS? I'm going to shorten them, standards for the SFDR. Looking at also in that context for you within ESMA, that harmonization in the bigger context, EU and the more global. Could you highlight some of the issues there for us?
Sure, Josina, thank you. So the ESRS is the corporate reporting framework. Probably when you come to speak in Brussels, everyone knows these acronyms, and sometimes we forget the bigger picture, get lost in the acronyms. But yeah, the ESRS is a very important piece of this puzzle. They will ensure greater transparency from undertakings that are subject to the party, the non-financial reporting directive about sustainability. And it is an increasingly important part also of the SFDR disclosures, because the ESRS data points are needed by the financial market participants making their disclosures of principal adverse impacts under SFDR. So that's an important part of the puzzle. We've obviously taken note at ESMA of the ESRS that EFRAG has submitted to the Commission. We will give our opinion by the end of January alongside the other ISs. So we're still scrutinizing that text, but it certainly does look quite good on the SFDR front. So all the data points are required for the SFDR KI disclosures are there. It's important that it all works together. And it's important to justify why there are so many data points in the SRS. If you're a corporate falling under this particular disclosure obligation and you've never heard of sustainability, then it can be suddenly quite surprising that you have to provide all this information. It is, however, quite important for the European understanding of sustainability and both, you know, the internal and external risks. I think we'll get on to double materiality later, but this is, you know, it is designed from that perspective to provide a very comprehensive transparency about companies' sustainability. And that will also help investors and civil society understand financial market participants' adverse impacts of investment decisions. It does all work together, and it is intended to do that. When it comes to international harmonization, I think it's very important from ESMA's perspective that the ESRS and the ISSB's forthcoming standards play well together. We understand preliminarily that there has been good contact between EFRAG and ISSB to ensure that coherence, which is good. However, we do have to warn that we haven't seen the final ISSB standards. They're not coming until later, early this year, still 2023. And then when we've seen that, I think we can make a better assessment about that coherence. But it is important, and the signs are looking good, at least.
Thank you very much, Patrik. And of course, you know, the EU is one of the first movers. And so you always have to go into dangerous waters, you know, and the boats coming behind you have it a bit easier. Lenny, for the boats coming behind the EU, you're working in the global context. Asset managers very often see everything in the global context. The challenges that you see, what are they?
Thank you. Yes, we'll come back to the double materiality later, but clearly it's good to see that there's an attempt to harmonize where things can be harmonized. It doesn't mean we should harmonize everything. Europe has specificities, and one of them is our focus on double materiality that we'll cover. But even once we will have done that, and once CSRD is out and everything is working fine, a lot of funds are international in nature, so we will still be lacking equivalent data. We'll see how we do it.
Thank you, Lenny. Aleksandra, so for you representing the end investor and the shareholder, what are some of the challenges that you see ahead of you with this EU and international context, and some of the what we're working with on double materiality and how it, how that impacts?
Yes, so Better Finance did take the ambitious tax on it. We did read the whole consultation of EFRAG. We did provide our input on the standards and our comments on how to improve some of them, what maybe should be changed. Like from retail investor perspective, of course, any proliferation and multiplication of different standards in the context of what we have discussed at the beginning of the panel, so the trust, is not ideal, far from ideal. And in our letter, when we were submitting our opinion and answer to the consultation to EFRAG, we did state very clearly that, of course, we would like to see harmonization of the standards. So we also saw that in the letter of EFRAG to the Commission, when they were submitting their standards, they also stated that they would like to see this assumption that if a company is compliant with the ESRS standards, they are already compliant with the ISSB. And I think from retail investor perspective, having this kind of certainty that if you have certain standards, they are harmonized and they are applied evenly in the EU and outside of the EU, would contribute to raising the level of trust in the financial services, in the sustainable financial products. Of course, provided that those standards are really optimized for also retail investors and they are ambitious enough.
Bryan, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so sustainability reporting has two aspects from a consumer perspective. One, the financial one, and one, the general consumer one. Sustainability reporting, once the data is available in the market, may also help people shape their consumption decisions, not just their investment decisions. So that's a benefit. In general, both on the financial aspect and on the general consumer aspect, I think what we're working on now in EFRAG and so forth is, of course, very detailed and complex information. And while useful, not necessarily immediately useful to most retail investors. What I would hope in the first step here is that we raise sustainability data, make it available to academics and so forth, and that therefore then through this intermediary step of academic analysis, we make more information available to consumers that way. I do not think that the current standards will be comprehensible to retail investors immediately, but they don't have to be to make sense. In terms of international harmonization, obviously I agree, fewer standards are better, provided they are reliable. I would like to mention though that should be downwards compatibility. So while harmonization is important, it should not limit the ambition of what we can do. Otherwise, we can never move past, say, ISSB standards.
I think that was a really significant comment that we shouldn't, go down. And it's good. And I think the EU has shown this ambition. And I think that's important, dare to go, even in spite of the criticism. Oh, again, EU puts the, too much legalistic barriers around everything. But someone has to wet their feet. And in this case, it's been the EU. I'm curious as to how artificial intelligence might help us with all of this or not, but I'm not going to go into that topic right away. I'm going to turn to the famous labeling, let's say, Article 8 and 9 funds, and that mismatch of what was in the aim of the legislation and what it turned into in the industry, which has been quite interesting to see this wave of labelization and categorization. But how easy or difficult is it actually to categorize an investment fund with activities, for example, in energy efficiency? And do we actually have the right framework to differentiate? How has all of this led to greenwashing? We've seen some studies come out from the Dutch supervisor, the AFM, which has been really interesting. But other supervisors, I think the AMF also came out with it. There's been quite a lot of information. I think Better Finance has also commented on this. Patrik, the reality of disclosures and that are being used as labels, how can you prevent or how can you readdress that situation?
How much time do we have?
You have.
I hope everyone's comfortable because I got a lot to say.
Good.
No, I'm kidding. I don't have that much to say, but yeah, no, I think at this point, I think we're well aware of the situation. SFDR is a transparency regulation intended to require financial market participants to show how their financial products either meet sustainability characteristics, Article 8, or have sustainable investment as their objective, Article 9. Now, in the absence of criteria underneath, except for the criteria of sustainable investments for Article 9, which is very important, there were none. And that created a situation where Article 8 and Article 9 started being used as labels, and they started being sold as sustainable products, and this created demand for Article 8, Article 9 products. We started hearing from the industry that, oh, our clients only want Article 9, etc., and or if it's not Article 8, then I don't want it, etc. So this certainly became evident quite quickly that SFDR disclosures were being used as sustainability labels, which they were not designed for. So what can we do about this then? Well, we've asked the Commission to clarify a number of things through Q&As, interactive Q&As, including the most important one issued in July 2021, that Article 9 should only make sustainable investments. Now, you might well ask why it has taken so long for so many Article 9 funds to so-called downgrade to Article 8. For that reason, there have been a number this month already, when that Q&A was issued in July 2021, almost 18 months ago. So you can see that there's a severe delay also in applying those standards that do exist even under SFDR. But that's a side point. The point is that, I mean, Article 9 certainly has some kind of framework around it. Even within that framework, it's clear that it's possible to interpret sustainable investment and that definition in Article 2, paragraph 17 of SFDR. There are certain criteria to that definition: contribution, do not significant harm, linked to the PAI indicators, and good governance. And even within that, it's possible to design it. You can design the NSH framework, for example, do not significantly harm, where fossil fuels can be tolerated to a certain extent. There's nothing illegal about that under SFDR Article 9 or 217. As such, the problem is exactly as you've explained. There's an expectation that Article 9, for example, does not include fossil fuels. And hence, this very significant investigation by a Dutch NGO that came out last week created quite a big wave. And partly this is good. It shows that transparency is working and organizations are looking into the underlying products and the underlying investments that the products make, and calling out the fact that while they're being sold under a sustainability proxy label, Article 9, they may not in fact be as sustainable as an expectation. Again, there's nothing illegal about that, but the expectation matching is not being done here. And I think that's okay. That can perhaps be chalked up as a success for us supervisors and regulators. That great, the transparency regime is working, but meanwhile, there's potential investor harm here. That has either already happened or could happen in the future, and that's obviously not a good situation. It's one of the reasons why we at ESMA decided to consult on one particular type of financial product, investment funds, and we have consulted on, are consulting on, it's currently live, on tying certain terms used in the name, which might give an expectation of sustainability to certain levels of disclosures under Article 8 and Article 9. Specifically, this much broader category of investments used to meet a characteristic or objective. Those should be linked to any ESG terms relatively used. And then any sustainable use of the word sustainable or any word derived from the word sustainable should be linked to a certain level of sustainable investments, those 217 investments. And that consultation, I mean, clearly shows that we're trying to do something about this situation, about the lack of expectations and reality matching here. And we are looking forward to a lot of feedback to this. Certainly, that's not the only way to design some kind of link between the name and what happens underneath. There are other ways to do it, so we are looking forward to feedback and ideas on that. I seem lost already. The problem with SFDR is once you start talking about it, you get sidetracked a lot. This happens to me all the time. What was I actually answering? Have I satisfied?
You have answered it. You have answered it. Thank you. I'm going to turn to Lenny. Because you mentioned the fact that, and as you were speaking, Patrik, I was just reminded of, and of course, SFDR is a regulation, and it should be applied, you know, the letter, it should be applied, but there are differences and there are different perceptions within different countries. And I think, Lenny, you can highlight some of the issues there.
Yes, I'll try at least. Well, I think the boxes prepared by SFDR are really good, the categories. The problem is we don't have the underlying definitions of the word. And pretty much everybody will have his or her own definition of what sustainability means or what impact means. So in France, clearly, Article 9 was considered impact fund instantly by the industry. It's very far from being an impact investment if you take impact in the kind of a purest definition. But what is a purest definition? So, for example, I was part a couple of years ago in a one-year exercise with 75 people, with everybody in the French industry, to define impact. This is exactly the type of work we should be doing at the European level, so then we can feed into these upcoming clarifications. And maybe we have something, maybe our Article 9 becomes impact, or maybe impact is something else. But we need the underlying definitions. Otherwise, you know, it was taken as a label, and we had the example of Article 9 being, what is the percentage of sustainable in there? And we had this in France, because one of the labels that is the most used, label ISR, is a 10% basically impact, or ESS, or whatever you want to call it, and 90% of whatever you want. So everybody was, okay, Article 9, is it 10% or is it 20? So yeah, we just need to do this work, and I'm not underestimating it. Agreeing on a definition is a lot of work, but we need at least a few words where we agree.
Yeah, it's a very good reminder of, you know, Patrik, you mentioned the use of acronyms, which we are very good at in the EU bubble, but also definitions, we throw them about, you know, and, you know, sustainability impact, you know, and what does it mean? And it has different, even when you translate it, it has a difference. So this is a complex world we live in. Patrik, I think you wanted to add something to what you said.
Yeah, I didn't answer your question about the energy efficiency, which is related to the impact concept. We'll always ask, can you or should you be able to have a kind of transition approach in Article 9, which can also sometimes be, I know it's not the same as impact, but if impact is in making a company improve their energy efficiency, for example, and that is a transition product, then that's what I'm talking about. It's tricky. As I said, it's technically possible to design tolerance levels under the 217 DNSH to allow that. I would sometimes have a slight legal problem with the wording "do not significantly harm." I'm not sure that kind of mean that, oh, in 7 years' time, I won't do significant harm, but I'll do significant harm until then. that's not exactly the wording of the definition, so it's a little bit difficult, but it also gives discretion to the financial market participant. That's the point here, and that's the most important point for everyone about SFDR. There are no criteria. The financial market participants design the criteria and are then transparent about it. The idea is that then the market efficiency should drive investors toward those financial products that they like based on that transparency. And then indeed, that can mean a proliferation of 100 different concepts of impact. And indeed, everyone is technically perfectly allowable and perfectly fine under this transparency regulation. But if we want to talk about labels, then that's something different. Then we are setting criteria for what is impact. And we're giving an EU definition for it. And some indeed are asking, can you please design this? Well, Commission, Parliament, and Council should design it, then it's a political decision. And that's perfectly fine. That can be done, but it will take many, many, many years. And until then, we want to make the transparency work as best as possible, and at least try to stop the egregious greenwashing that may happen as a result of the use of transparency measures as
Thank you, Patrik. I think that was actually quite useful when I turn now to Aleksandra. Patrik shows actually the meaning behind the SFDR, but do your members, your investors, does it filter down to them? Do they, that transparency and that understanding, or is this really not going to work at all?
Yeah, the discussion and in fact what is happening with the fund and the categorization that is happening is of course contributing to the problem with the trust in sustainable finance products. In the DSW study that we had in Germany, we saw also that 64% of the respondents did not follow up on the advice of their advisor on buying or recommending sustainable finance products. And I think this is not coming from nowhere. It is not irrational. Unfortunately, it is really based in the information that they can read in the press and that they are pretty familiar with. It is double as frustrating because, as also some other studies show, over 60% of retail investors do want to invest sustainably. Then they are faced with different scandals. I understand, and to some extent, they also probably that SFDR was not intended as a regulation that would give labels to some financial products, but they also see that they are being used and the disclosures are being used like that. And it's double as frustrating because on top of that, of course, when retail investors are investing in sustainable products, they do it also to align their values with what is happening in the financial industry, but they also expect return. And we had also a lot of discussion on whether or not, while investing in sustainable products, which Better Finance found it not as a very good discussion, they should sacrifice the returns. It seems from different studies right now being published, and also from one that Better Finance was doing that is not published, that actually at least some of these ESG funds and sustainable funds overperform the mainstream products. So it could be even very good financially for retail investors. So the whole idea and the problems that are happening with Article 8 and 9 funds is of course not contributing to directing the financial and the capital into the sustainable investments. How it should be. We would really like to see Article 9 funds, if we are discussing this, as really impact funds, because really positive social and environmental impact that is measurable is also something that retail investors want, and what do they actually really expect from financial products. So not some kind of vague promise of what can happen, but really measurable impact.
Okay, so you've come out very clearly with a recommendation. Bryan, you are working together with Finance Watch, and I think you have had a recent paper that goes a little bit into this.
Yes, I think it was in spring when we published a paper together with Finance Watch and several other NGOs on what needs to change about SFDR to help combat greenwashing, because while I do see that there is some transparency in the market that we see through lawsuits brought by our members and so forth. Ultimately, SFDR does not do what we needed to do from a consumer perspective. And that was effectively, in hindsight, which is 2020, unavoidable, I think, because if you create a system that says these are the things you need to disclose to be able to say that you are sustainable, then people will go out and say we're sustainable now under these rules, and then you have product standards, even if it wasn't intended. And so the paper we published earlier is essentially a proposal of how to establish a product standard, because we believe that that is necessary, because right now consumers are sold products as sustainable that just aren't on massive scale and exponentially growing year on year in a way that is entirely irrational. If all of these funds were truly sustainable, that are understood by the consumers who buy them to be sustainable, then our economy would look very differently. But our economy, which is the fundamental problem, is not sustainable. So where do you get all of these sustainable assets from suddenly? That just doesn't make no sense. We have a problem here also in the scope of sustainable finance. We are discussing this largely for retail investors, for consumers. And obviously there is an interest for consumers to invest sustainably, and that's why we are working on this as well, and we are supporting the agenda in general. But it's not a consumer task to green the financial markets. We need rules for financial industry, even those who do not want to be sustainable and who are not marketing sustainability. Because if we are arguing that financial markets are the steering tool for sustainability, then the industry that actually works the mechanics of this system needs to be beholden to those goals. And the same, by the way, goes for government spending. And you cannot roll off the responsibility to change the economic system to consumers by their choices. That is just not plausible. And why am I saying this is because when we're debating impact, we're saying, well, it's very hard to prove impact and so forth. That's because it's very hard to achieve impact if you have this very narrow definition of what you can do, that the consumer activism essentially is the only way to generate impact. Then you can barely make any, and then you cannot market any, and then you have this problem on the markets because people want to buy sustainable products, but they can't be manufactured. So the expectation problem is not just one of communication, it is that also, but it is also one of political ambition and scope. Yeah, so the problem goes beyond SFDR, but SFDR is also a problem.
I like that last sentence, the problem is beyond SFDR. SFDR is also a problem. I think I was reminded of the Edelman Trust. The Edelman Institute also does a yearly trust survey, and in 2021, their trust survey highlighted the fact that consumers, people, are looking for democratic accountability to companies and not to governments. And I think that for me was a quite significant issue when we look at sustainability. You highlighted the fact that we throw back onto consumers, private investors, the fact that, you're going to change the world. No, well, we can't. So who is responsible? And I think that also goes to that issue when we look at companies and the way they present themselves. They have a very simplistic approach to how they're standing within their environment, their approach to risk. There's as yet, I'm saying as yet, I always want to be positive. There's no looking at a cascade of risk and where it's coming from. So there's no awareness yet. It's all very flat. There's no dimensional, three-dimensional part to this. And I think, you know, the problem with sustainability, of course, it's like amoeba. It's very loose moving, you know, and it's sort of hard to put a shape to it, which doesn't help us at all. But coming to the topic of labels, because of course we've sort of touched on it, Patrik, the FCA has come out with a package of new measures. Of course, they're coming after what we've been doing at the EU. Should we adopt a similar approach at the EU level?
Favorite third country. I think almost all the answers to the conundrum posed by SFDR being used as a proxy label, being financial products being distributed with the help of SFDR, etc. Almost all the answers can be found in the taxonomy. You want criteria? We'll have 600 pages for the first two objectives. You want more criteria? You'll get 1,000 more for the last four. There's definitely criteria there. Don't be afraid. There's plenty of criteria for sustainability in the EU. The taxonomy is almost always the answer to all the questions about sustainability. Now we can have very long debates about nuclear and gas, but the fact is that the taxonomy remains the basis of what is agreed to be sustainable at the EU level, and that can, to me, also seems to be the formation of what sustainable investment should be. The problem stems from the kind of transparency approach, which has this other concept of sustainability, and that allows discretion, etc. The taxonomy does not give discretion. That you either comply with those criteria or you don't. I know it's not quite that simple, but broadly speaking, that's the case. Now, when it comes to labels, actually, ESMA does agree that there should be labels for financial products, because otherwise, this problem with expectations about sustainability is difficult to match then with an entirely transparency-based framework. We don't think that that is a tenable future for sustainable finance and for financial products being sold as sustainable. Now, we can all think about what happened with the eco label for investment funds. That was specifically tied to the taxonomy, and that was a very difficult debate. You know what? It's difficult to create labels. I don't think that the FCA's consultation is enough in and of itself to satisfy the demand for sustainability and the kind of rigorous regulation of industry that Bryan asked for at the same time. I don't think that's the case. In fact, the more you look at the four types of financial products that could exist under the FCA one, the more you start having questions about how exactly that would be designed, what exactly could fit into those categories. And then the pressure becomes inexorable to start adding more and more, stricter framework around each of these until we get into a very specific product standard that Aleksandra mentioned. And that, I think, is the way to go. I know it sounds a bit top-down ivory tower again, I'm sorry for that, but I think we are getting to the point where I think we have to sell these products under specifically strong standards, and I think the taxonomy is a very good basis for that.
Thank you, Patrik. Now, Lenny, you said to me in a previous conversation that, there are already many labels in France, and that a couple more might create even more confusion. So what is your opinion? Having listened to Patrik, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll dare to disagree, which I mean, not only in France, I think everywhere we just have way too many labels, and we as professionals, it's hard to follow. I don't think anybody on the retail industry can make the difference between a European label, a national label, a private label, a green label, a social label, whatever other label you want. So where I will agree 100% is that the taxonomy is central. So hopefully we'll have the next 1,000 pages next year, and maybe a social taxonomy afterwards, which is even harder to make, I'm sure. So we have a church in the middle of the village. From there, we just need, simple and transparent communication. And for that, I think the other proposal, just below the labels in the same text, there was restricting the use of words, which is also actually what ESMA is doing with the ongoing consultation. This comes pretty close to a definition of words. What is green? You can use green in this context, but not in another context. And without naming it, you won't have an ESG aware index, which just the name drives me mad. So hopefully nobody from that company is here. Thank you.
Bryan, labels, you went into it a little bit already, but maybe some further thoughts, having listened to Patrik and Lenny.
So labels are powerful tools that are supposed to be used responsibly. I agree with that more labels are not a benefit for consumers. Having a few labels that distinguish products and then are universally recognized and trustworthy would be helpful. However, labels are the end of the process, not the middle of it. So we're discussing labels now to try to give orientation to consumers when we haven't even raised the data yet, when we can't provide analysis that is coherent to consumers, when we have different methodologies and definitions and so forth. And the confusion is observed. And then we say, okay, let's create labels to fight the confusion. And the problem is labels can only be based on a finished analysis in the end. You have to have somebody who is well oriented to actually structure a label before you can push it, before you can make it. And the problem is that we aren't really there yet. And this is also part of what happened to the eco-label for financial products, is that it got put on ice because we were not sure what to put in there. And so we need to solve the back end first and generate actual definitions and so forth. And then we can create a front end for the consumers that says, look, here's a thing that does this, and if this sticker is on it, then that's that. But that is the end of the process, and we aren't even in the middle yet, I'd say.
Okay, reality call, which is important in this whole roadmap. Yes, Patrik, go ahead.
Remember how I said that the taxonomy is the answer to everything? It's also the answer to transition, and why it's much easier to think of transition in terms of the taxonomy rather than SFDR. Because the taxonomy actually has a goal, climate change adaptation, that is literally designed to help adapt to climate change. There's also a way to measure taxonomy alignment or the extent of taxonomy aligned activities by CapEx. Now, CapEx literally is something that is going to happen in the future and not right now. So there are much better transition tools in the tailor-made in the taxonomy than there are in SFDR, which is a static concept. There is literally a legal definition that says that the investment shall not do significant harm to any environmental or social objective. It's much harder. As I explained, you can design it in a way because there is discretion, but it's not common.
Yeah, you can.
Very shortly on labels, because as Better Finance, when the discussion on the EU label for sustainable financial products started, we were quite skeptical because we have been previously doing studies on closet indexers, and we found among them identified also potential closet indexers with already some socially responsible labels from national authorities. So we were quite skeptical. On the other hand, we thought, yeah, having sustainable finance products with an ambitious EU label could probably help investors, gaining trust towards those products. And then at the same time, we started a discussion that we're in fact trying to push down the level of ambition for the EU label. And we thought that this actually could be really a label for like proper environmental excellence, but as a proper basis for that for us is really that the products that are going to be awarded any of this kind of levels should first of all really excel in investor protection as such. So no potential indexers there.
I can't shut up about this topic. I don't know anything about the rest of the topic, so I'll be silent then. But one more thing. There are also Paris-aligned benchmarks and climate transition benchmarks. This is not to be underestimated. There are actually, those are indices, EU benchmarks that actually have proper standards to them, and they have built in this year-on-year improvement, which is also much easier to consider in the transition context as well. That's certainly something that's to be borne in mind. And there's a link with those benchmarks to Article 9.3 in the SFDR as well, which also give a kind of SFDR transparency regime for products that designate those indices as reference benchmarks.
So as you can see, the panel is very caught up in this topic, but I wonder if the audience has any questions on what we've been discussing. There you go. Okay, we're going to take a question there. Can you say who the question is for, or if it's to the whole panel?
Hi, does this work? Yep. It's to anybody in the panel who's interested in answering. So, yeah, we're talking here about the body of sustainability information potentially available to retail investors. And we've sort of talked about it through the lens of the SFDR and the various disclosure requirements therein or in other pieces of sustainable finance regulation. But at 2DI, we've got analysis that when it comes to retail investors and the business to consumer context, then the UCPD, the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, also has application. That's a piece of legislation which applies cross sectors. It's based on full harmonization. It's intended to apply where there's no more specific sectoral regulation in its place. So yeah, we see that as having a significant sort of role to play in terms of a lot of information which gets in front of retail investors, or should have a role. It doesn't seem to be applied by market participants, by regulators, and I wonder if any of you have any comments on that.
If I may shortly, yes, we think it's a very, very good piece of of EU law that could be applied here, especially to this unsubstantiated green marketing claims. We as Better Finance have done a video on greenwashing, and honestly, we had this idea to, at the end of the video, to put, some kind of guidance for consumers or retail investors to know where actually they should turn or what kind of, legal basis that they could use. But first and foremost, like to whom they could even kind of flag that they think there could be some unsubstantiated green marketing claim. The problem is that with UCPD, as you know, there is no also coherent application in terms of who is responsible in different member states for application and enforcement of UCPD, because in some countries, when there is a kind of a problem, the consumer has to go directly to court. And of course, in this kind of case, it depends on how much really money, time, and other resources he or she has to really go to court and then start the proceedings right away through the court. But I think it's kind of unused.
Which goes to my first comment about having an ombudsman at the EU level, maybe might solve it. Patrik, do you want to come in on that?
That's why it's good to come to Brussels. You learn about new legislation that you've forgotten about. So that's a good point. I hadn't thought about.
We have.
Bryan, go ahead. Yeah.
So we share the analysis that this is a tool that can be used for false advertising in financial services, and we have done some initial outreach towards the parties we think could be responsible for as a more strict enforcement in this case, but we'll see where that goes. And since I'm not the one driving this, I'm not going to go into too much detail on that.
Okay, but very useful point. Thank you for raising it. That was really great. I think there were some other questions.
Yeah. Nicola, I'm the head of retail investing at 2 Degrees Investing Initiative. So my question would be towarded to Patrik. So first, to start maybe with the positive side, indeed, I think SFDR and also MiFID II are great advancements in terms of transparency, and also, you know, it's a big move forward, no doubt. However, according to our research from the last 3 years, I must really conclude that there are two major flaws which are surprising, because as the ESAs themselves, they concluded in 2017 that there are two major objectives for retail clients. And this is first to align values with your investment, but second, to have impact with your investment. While SFDR and also MiFID are covering a value-aligned motivation by, let's say, excluding companies who don't apply to DNSH principles, or which are taxonomy aligned, or which are active in sustainable activities, SFDR and nor MiFID are accommodating impact-oriented investors. And I don't fully follow your conclusion that integrating this concept of investor impact in a regulation would require another 5 years of negotiations, because we recommend that actually level 3 guidelines, which would just clarify the confusion within the regulation, by the way, because even if you read SFDR, there are certain articles like Article 4, 7, 10, also in the RTS, it is a confusion between investor and company impact. And this is also an ongoing confusion in the market. Yesterday, we had a full dedicated day on impact as a topic in this conference. And we had two investors at the stage, and also they completely confused the both concepts. So the concept of company impact and investor impact. So we think that it would be a pretty fast and easy, not a full fix, but a great advancement if we would have level 3 guidelines, which would clarify the difference between investor and company impact, because it is confused already in the regulation at the moment. And also to set basic principles, which are already common knowledge in the industry, what minimum requirements would be for an impact investing product. So could you, I don't know, what's your opinion to it?
Go ahead, Patrik.
Nope. Yeah, we're not doing that. SFDR is a transparency regime. We can't say that, oh, within that transparency, you have to do impact this way. Or that Article 9 is only impact. There is absolutely no evidence. I know Article 10(1)(b) says, you know, that the products has to show the overall sustainability impact, which has been used as an argument to suggest that Article 9 was intended only for impact. I don't think that's the case. I don't think you can exclusively limit it. It can be part of Article 9. I don't think you can exclusively limit it to that as opposed to something else. We can only set the basic framework within which the discretionary decisions of the financial market participants are disclosed to the end investors. Beyond that, it's up to the financial market participant to design the framework of the financial product that they're providing. As long as they abide by Article 9 and 217, everything else is up to them, basically. So that's the problem here. Furthermore, when it comes to the various concepts used, that's an utterly fair point, and I fully agree, and I am part of the problem in that concepts are used in the legislation, both in level 1 and a lot in level 2, and they're not always consistent. That's fair. We have an implicit understanding of some ways in which sustainability is done in financial products, and that is then used in the legislation and in the RTSs in level 2 delegated regulation, sometimes interchangeably, and that's a fair point. And we can try to help do that. In fact, we have the delegated regulation open right now for review because the Commission sent us a mandate to look at a couple of small things there. We'll come out with a consultation paper next year. Feel free to respond to that with additional points where we have missed something. Level 3 guidelines, of course, is always a possibility where we feel that this could provide clarity and help in certain situations. due to the workload of this new mandate, it's not possible to do that immediately at least, but it's certainly something that we're bearing in mind. But finally, the most important point is that we can't interpret the law. Only the European Commission can do that. That's why we send certain questions to the Commission to respond to, like the one about Article 9 and sustainable investments. We've sent a number of additional ones about sustainable finance and sustainable investments as well. And the Commission does that. So that's the kind of process where the interpretation is done by the Commission. We send them questions, they respond. The practical application guidance we do, so we publish 60 Q&As in November. We'll probably do more of them next year as well. But formal guidelines is always a possibility as well. Where we have a good case to make them, we can certainly consider that. So I look forward to input from you and others also to the consultation.
Well, Patrik, that's very clear. And I think you also highlight the issue of the complexity that we have always when do we give a lot of detail at level 1? Do we go into more sort of high level at the level 1? We saw it with the prospectus regulation, you know, the complexity when you try to regulate too much at the level 1. It's a constant, you know, and I think this is something probably that the next commission might be looking at, this revision of this Lamfalussy process, the revision of the levels, and where do you situate the detail? Because I think this goes to the heart of that question, I think. I'm not going to take any more questions because I have some topics I still want to, so forgive me, we'll take questions at the end. I know that the timing, we only have a quarter of an hour left. So this topic, we could go on all afternoon, Anais, basically. Yeah? Let me go to quickly, and let's do a quick round on this, on the adaptation of MiFID suitability requirements and the product governance guidelines. So, okay, we're adding yet more detail into the suitability requirements when already the criticism and the BaFin study 2.5 years ago was that it's box ticking. So what really can we do to facilitate clarity in those suitability requirements by including all the sustainability issues? I think, Bryan, I'm going to turn to you first.
So I mentioned this a bit earlier, but financial advice is at the core of many of these problems here, because the sale of financial products is done via inducements, and the incentive for the advisor is not to provide the best advice to the consumer, but to sell a product that has the highest rate of inducements. That is a mainstream retail finance problem, but it also echoes out into sustainable finance, because again, the financial advisor has interests in advice not aligned with the interests of the consumer. The advisor must sell products that are available to them. Many are bound salespeople. And the second part is that still the interest is to sell the product that is highly commissioned. And so first of all, the consumer doesn't really make a choice here, which is a sustainability problem, because the sustainability preferences of the consumer don't really matter. The negotiation of the financial industry with its sales front piece is what matters for investment decisions on retail investment markets. And so that's why we don't see much competition, for example, for actual sustainability quality in products, as well as financial quality in financial products. And now, through this system, we're introducing sustainability advice into the already misnamed financial advice, and are expecting the financial advisor to orient a consumer on a highly complex and subjective topic adequately. And that just cannot work. It never will. There's no way to do this. I think on the guidelines, the best that could be done has been done. I think that's not very good, but that's not that's not the issue of the supervisory authorities. And yeah, and then there's one thing, even like in the level 2, you can ask a consumer to adjust their sustainability preferences if you have no product on sale that matches what they said first. So you have to assess first, and then you say, sorry, I'm not selling that. Would you like to buy what I'm selling? And then the consumer either says yes or no. And so you might as well not do this. This is a non-exercise. If you have 5 products for sale as an advisor, 2 of them are sustainable, and one of them has a bit higher inducements than the other one, the consumer, I can tell you what product the consumer is going to go out of that setting with. It has nothing to do with their preferences at all. So yeah, I'm not very satisfied with the MiFID amendments.
Okay, so Aleksandra, the DSW study has also thrown up some light on this. Would you comment on that?
Yes, well, the DSW study and the outcomes of the survey are definitely pointing to the fact that it's not working, that we have a phenomenon of a misnomer in terms of financial advice. You would really like to see proper differentiation between selling and advice. We don't have much advice in EU. Independent advice is scarce. I think in Germany, BaFin identifies 17 independent advisors for the whole population of Germany, which I would say it's rather, yeah, few. So it is not working. I mean, you asked for a quick round on that. We have a short, quick position paper on retail investment strategy, and there we also say what we would like that should be changed in a suitability area as well. But first and foremost, we would really like to see, ban on inducements, or at least really this distinguishment between sales and advice.
And of course, in Europe, we have different structures, you know, whether it's in-house, and I think you have Southern Europe typically has these in-house structures. Although I see that Poland went from an open structure back into an in-house structure. So it is fluid, and that doesn't help regulation. Lenny, from the perspective of the asset manager and the professional investor, what do you see?
I'd like to be positive and say it's great because it brings the conversation probably in the right place with the end investor. I'm not sure it really works as it is. Clearly, we'll need other rounds of improvement. And there's a second question, but I think they're linked. And I'm going back to my theme of education. I'm not sure the retail preferences will reflect the real need. They will reflect the marketing effort, for sure. They will reflect the mood of the moment, for lack of a better word. I'm not sure they will reflect the real long-term needs that we as a society face.
Okay, so that is clear message. Anais, I hope you're doing some takeaways from all these discussions and some of the comments. Okay, that's great. I love to see takeaways on this. I know we only have 7 minutes, so let's go to the Shareholders' Rights Directive. And I think Better Finance, Guillaume, I seem to recall, always has said that plumbing doesn't work across Europe. We need a true plumber, cross-border voting. But you know, what is the definition of a shareholder? We've seen in COVID some of the issues around the annual general meeting with online annual general meetings, you know, not leaving enough room for discussion, with discussions being directed and too biased, perhaps. Voting rights. So how can we really remedy on this, where, you know, Shareholders' Rights Directive revision was in 2016, we're, you know, quite a few years down the road. Where could we go?
Oh, this is a topic, this is a river. First of all, on the 24th of January, we are going to publish our newest research on this topic. We have done this with our member organizations. We have surveyed both member organizations and individual investors, and the outcome is disastrous. So situation is not improving, is even worsening. The retail investors are not really able to exercise their basic right, which is voting. And of course, especially in the cross-border context, the fees for being able to exercise these rights are rising. Now they amount from 50 to 250 euros, even if it comes to just one share. So already on this financial barrier, you see it is not working. On top, quite often you don't get in the information, you get the information very late. Sometimes you get the voting card and the possibility to vote after the AGM, which is far from ideal. We have also many recommendations how to improve this. You can read them in detail in the study that we will publish on the 24th of January. But first and foremost, really, we would need a definition of shareholder, because what is right now is that the shareholder is defined by basically the applicable law in the member states, and this is simply not working. And also having really this extreme differences in paying and in the fees for voting between the cross-border and national voting are really not justified. So this should be also looked into.
And I forgot to mention proxy voting with the complexities of passing information on to end investors. We've seen several instances where, you know, that is not getting the right information or information being changed even from financial reports. So that doesn't facilitate so I think there is quite a lot of the plumbing work that needs to be done. And again, we come back to the problem of definitions as well, which keeps recurring. Lenny, I'm going to turn to you on this revision and what is wrong with the plumbing. Any ideas or advice on this?
Well, if I'll take the question of plumbing a bit more generally than just the shareholder rights. Then I might mix a bit all the subjects we still had, but for retail investors, when we talk about sustainability, ESG, all this, it's the second materiality, it's not the first one. That's the one that comes to mind. And all this information that is still lacking, but it's coming with CSRD, etc., needs to be public. So I have great hopes that ESAP will be up and running and functional. So the European single access point for all this data. But we need an access to this data, otherwise we don't understand what we're voting, because we just receive very, very few and not easily legible information. I mean, for retail investors, when you have an army of analysts, it's easier. Maybe I'll stay there.
Thank you. And again, I think it's quite clear from this panel where we need to go and what we need to take. Now we have a few minutes, so are there any questions?
I have a question about what has been said by Bryan, the consumer interest in financial products. One item that springs to my mind is the long-term savings represented by entitlements to pension schemes. I see sort of a disconnect. What is the weight of this issue in the EU Green Deal? And as long as there is a lock on, for instance, biodiversity opportunity represented by nature-based solutions, the lock is do no significant harm, we miss out on a contribution to climate change mitigation that is inherent in transformative change in food systems and the textiles value chain. They represent 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's about time to go for policy coherence, because these issues, that's my core issue, the biodiversity strategy, farm to fork, I don't see any coherence with what is being said here. And I would like to see that as a prime issue, especially during this COP15 week, where nature finance is one of the prominent initiatives to find inspiration for solutions in finance.
Thank you.
Agree more, and of course whenever we can see more policy coherence within the EU but also beyond, and especially on climate change, I think nobody could really disagree. So very good point. Thank you.
Lenny? Yeah.
Just one more point, because I mean, it's work in progress, and indeed the climate subject has a little bit ahead, and you were mentioning the Paris aligned benchmarks. I think we have to be careful that we don't focus too much on only climate, because you know, if tomorrow morning every car is electric, the biodiversity is over, and we're still dead. Maybe it's warmer or not as warm, but it doesn't change much. So there needs to be a catch up on the other subjects, and we need to have an overall view. I think you're pretty right.
Yeah, Rob.
Thank you for the panel. Very insightful for somebody outside the bubble. This morning, I gave a workshop and a presentation on measuring preferences of individuals. And I heard you talk about that here as well. And I think some of you were there at the end, but most of you were not there. And since Patrik is here now, so I just wonder how ESMA is going to check the quality of preference measurement of all those financial institutions. Do you have a plan?
Enforcement in general is more difficult for ESMA because we are not the supervisor of institutions. We don't supervise asset managers, we don't supervise investment firms. So the distributional element there is supervised by the national supervisor. What we do is supervisory convergence, which is our favorite terminology, which we use a lot, but I understand that it's not very used often outside ESMA. So it bears explaining a little bit. We try to work towards the same outcomes across the jurisdictions. It's not always easy, but we certainly try. We have various tools at our disposal to help that supervisory convergence, including in order to ensure that the distribution process and sustainability preferences are applied in the same way. And I'm not in the investment protection department, but I'm pretty sure they're doing a common supervisory action this year, so 2023, on the distribution process. So I think we may indeed, and you should see some outcome from that as well. We usually publish the results of these actions and then any follow-up from that. So we certainly do have a plan and hope that it assists.
Okay, I think there was one gentleman who already wanted to raise his hand before the last question, and then we go on to Sven.
Yeah, actually, I have three questions. The first one is how to make sure that at least financial advisors have some sustainability, mandatory sustainability training and knowledge so that they know a little bit what they talk about when they want to sell sustainable funds. And secondly, is there a way with the current regulatory system before it's revised to clarify if some funds are deemed impact funds or not? Maybe, is it possible to clarify, to ask in the current framework if funds are impact funds according to the investor or not? Does it require a regulatory change? And third, to clarify the transition landscape, the platform recommended to develop an extended traffic light and environmental taxonomy in 3 categories: green, amber, red. I was part of this subgroup, so I'm very biased. I think it's a very good report, very relevant one. But using the same taxonomy criteria as of today, and no need to add anything, just use this in a more and in an extended, more meaningful way. Do you think that would help to clarify and reduce the risk of transition washing? Thanks.
Yeah, no, I like that report actually, and I think we don't take official positions on the platform's papers, but I thought that was a good one. I thought the social taxonomy report was a good one too, and I think there's definitely merit in using the taxonomy logic also to the social side, but also to the idea of an amber, green, the intermediate, and an always harmful taxonomy as well. I think that's a good idea. Commend that report to the Commission. On the second question about, theoretically it's possible, yes, correct. A decent enough Q&A, perhaps directed to the Commission, could try to create some kind of framework around impact. It's not impossible. There is a slight problem here that we're once again stuffing in criteria into the SFDR world. We may have to do that, and it's probably maybe the best way to solve an interim solution. That's not a long-term solution though, and think the Commission is uncomfortable every time we ask them questions like this, because we are putting them in the situation of having to be a criteria setter under a regulation that is about transparency, of course. So that's a problem, but I see the point, and it's been made also by other people in this conference. So it's fair enough. We may have to address it that way.
So I'm afraid that I'm going to have to stop. We could go on, and I know we didn't really answer question 1, but maybe in a coffee break that could be talked about. You have literally, okay, 1 second.
1 second is very short. Yeah, the solution, I think, at least the first step to a solution is requiring financial advisors to be educated on the subject they advise on. And so this ties hand in hand with our demand to increase education requirements for financial advisors on financial matters and also then on sustainability matters.
Thank you. So with this, I'm going to thank my panel. I know we had a lot more material for discussion. Sven, apologies, we took up some time, but I hope you listened and took some takeaways from this panel discussion. Thank you to the audience for your active participation, and please approach any of us for any other information. Thank you.